We've got a diplomatic process that is right on the brink of completely collapsing, a military standoff brewing in one of the world's most critical waterways. The United States and Iran are locked in this incredibly high-stakes standoff, and honestly, the path to peace seems to have just vanished. Okay, let's dive into this and unpack how we got here, and more importantly, if there's any off-ramp left.
This quote, it just cuts right to the chase. This statement from the Speaker of Iran's parliament really frames the whole problem from their perspective. For them, trying to negotiate under this kind of pressure isn't a negotiation at all. It's basically being told to surrender. And that, right there, sets the stage for a massive diplomatic deadlock.
So you gotta ask, how did things escalate to this point? Because it's kind of crazy to think that just a few weeks ago, there was some real hope for a breakthrough. Let's take a look at how that hope just completely evaporated.
So, back on April 11th, something pretty promising happened. Thanks to Pakistan playing mediator, US and Iranian envoys actually met face-to-face in Islamabad. Now, sure, the talks didn't solve everything, but it was a genuine diplomatic opening. It showed both sides were at least interested in finding a way out of this peacefully.
And this is where things just go off the rails, and fast. The talks start on April 11th, but by the middle of the month, boom, the US imposes a naval blockade. A little later, an Iranian cargo ship gets seized. And the result? By the end of April, Iran says, nope, we're out, and cancels the next round of talks. I mean, what a disastrously rapid escalation.
And here's why they pulled out. Officially, Tehran said it was because of a complete breakdown of trust. They pointed to what they saw as excessive demands and constant shifts in stance from Washington. You know, when one side feels like the goalposts are always moving, it's pretty much impossible to have a real negotiation.
All right, so all of that brings us right here, to the core of this conflict. It's a dangerous psychological battle where neither side feels like it can afford to give a single inch.
The source material calls this a classic who blinks first situation, which is the perfect way to describe it. It's basically a high-stakes game of chicken. Any little sign of flexibility, any concession at all, is seen by the other side as weakness, something to be exploited, not a step towards peace.
And this slide just lays out the deadlock perfectly. You have the US saying, the blockade stays up until you agree to a deal. And then you have Iran saying, we're not even talking about a deal while the blockade is up. It's a perfect diplomatic catch-22, a total impasse with no obvious way forward.
So, if the talking stops for good, what's next? Well, the source we're looking at calls it a no-win war. And it's so important to understand the incredibly steep price that both sides would end up paying.
For the United States, the price tag is just massive. A military conflict would probably wreck the region's energy infrastructure, which would cause huge economic fallout and rising inflation back home. And politically, with midterm elections coming up and the war being super unpopular with the public, the timing just couldn't be worse.
And yeah, speaking of politics, look at this. The source points out that right in the middle of this crisis, President Trump's approval ratings have plunged to an all-time low. That adds a ton of pressure at home to find a solution that isn't some costly, open-ended war.
Now, let's be super clear. It's not like Iran gets off easy here. While the US would definitely suffer, the source material is very clear that in an all-out war, Iran would face even more damaging consequences. It's a mutually destructive path for sure.
So that begs the question, right? If a conflict is this bad for everybody, why is it so hard to just get back to the negotiating table? Well, it turns out there are some pretty major hurdles in the way.
And the list of problems is long. You've got both sides making these huge, maximalist demands that leave almost no room for compromise. The mistrust between them is, well, deeper than ever. Both are flexing their military muscle to try and get leverage, which just makes things more tense. On top of that, you've got President Trump's mixed messages and pressure from other countries, like Israel, who are against any kind of deal. It's a perfect storm of diplomatic problems.
But what if there's a way out? Despite all this chaos, the source suggests there might be one key that could unlock this entire situation. And it all comes back to a single central issue.
And here it is. It all comes down to the nuclear issue. That's the linchpin. While other things are important, like sanctions and security, if they can find common ground on Iran's nuclear program, everything else could potentially start to fall into place.
So what would that actually look like? The source lays out a potential roadmap. It would start with the US acknowledging Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy. That's a huge first step. Then the US would have to ease up on its demands about Iran's enriched uranium. In return, Iran could offer to downblend that uranium, basically make it less potent, all under international supervision. It's a delicate dance, but it's a path.
And that brings us to this quote, which I think just perfectly captures the whole situation. It's a powerful reminder that diplomacy has to be based in reality. You can't just expect to win at the negotiating table what you couldn't secure through force. A real deal means you have to recognize the other side's leverage.
And that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? After all, the military posturing and threats have only led to a dead end. Can these two sides find an off-ramp? Can they pivot back to diplomacy and find a breakthrough that force just couldn't deliver? The answer to that is going to shape the future of the entire region.